Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for coming to the Rachel Carson Council's Mastering the Op-Ed and Letter to the Editor webinar. We're so thrilled to have you here, and within the next hour, we're going to focus on cultivating your writing skills to empower you to be a leader within your community. For those of you who are new to the Rachel Carson Council, to Rachel Carson Council events, my name is Diego Tovar, and I'm the Director of Campus and Civic Engagement, where I deal with all things colleges and universities. So if you're a student, if you're faculty, if you're staff, or if you're just connected to campus work in any shape or form and are interested in connecting and collaborating with the Rachel Carson Council down the line, please feel free to reach out to me, and our emails will be posted at the end of this event.
Thanks, Diego. Hi, everyone. My name is Joy Reeves. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategic Development at RCC. And I'm sure a lot of you know RCC, but if this is your first event with us, we are a national nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., focused on environmental justice and youth advocacy, especially in our campus network of over 85 colleges and universities. And this is our pilot workshop series for the fall. And again, we're extremely grateful for this turnout and familiar faces. So without further ado, I think we can get started.
Yeah, and finally, for a few housekeeping rules. Throughout this webinar, you're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat. During our official Q&A towards the end, we'll have questions compiled and we'll read them out. And we'll also have a time for a few direct questions. Just make sure you use your raise your hand feature so we can keep orderly webinar here, and try to remain on mute throughout so we can power through and share all this great information with you. And lastly, please be respectful to one another in the chat.
All right, I'll kick us off. An overview here. Why are we writing op-eds and LTEs? Diego's going to give some background on the purpose of these advocacy pieces and how they can serve you in your careers or in your advocacy. And then this workshop is going to kind of be two parts. So Diego's going to start with what is an op-ed, how to write a good op-ed, and focusing on that longer form media piece. And then we're going to pivot, and I'm going to jump in and give an overview of the LTE, or letter to the editor, a different but often confused advocacy piece of writing. And then there will be an interactive portion where you will walk away from this workshop with an LTE outline or idea ready to be built upon and submitted.
So before we get into the how, I want to pause on the why. Why writing op-eds and letters to the editor are such powerful forms of climate action. So first, these pieces shape public conversation. When you write about climate issues in a local or national paper, you're steering what people are paying attention to in the media. So you're keeping the climate crisis visible in spaces where it might be otherwise fading from major headlines. Second is decision makers really do read these sections. So elected officials, city council members, even university administrators use public commentary to gauge what their communities care about. So your words can literally help set the tone for policy discussions. And op-eds and LTEs amplify community voices, especially those that aren't always heard in traditional media. So when someone from a frontline community, a student, a young activist speaks out, it brings authenticity and urgency that can't be replicated through a traditional press release or a traditional report. And finally, these pieces can drive real, tangible change. So a well-timed letter to the editor or op-ed can influence a local vote, shift a policy debate, or rally people to show up for a cause. So think of the op-ed and LTE beyond a writing exercise. They're tools for action and ways to connect storytelling with impact. So first, let's talk about the op-ed. So an op-ed is roughly 800 words. It's a persuasive essay that enables you to share your perspective, shape public opinion, and influence decision makers. So when we think about opinion writing, I want you to imagine yourself as a tree in a forest. So where there is surrounding wind and you have deep roots in the soil. The purpose of an op-ed is to move people, aka the wind, which I'll describe in a moment, and anchor ideas, aka the roots. So the wind side is what stirs the atmosphere and scatters the leaves. It's about sparking debate, shifting perspectives, and bringing a fresh lens to an issue people might think they already understand. Good opinion shakes things up and gets readers talking. But an op-ed also needs roots. It has to ground the conversation in something real, deep into the soil. This can be your story, your community, your data, your statistics, your lived experience. That's what gives readers something to hold on to and remember long after they close the tab or put down the paper. So every strong op-ed lives in that balance. Wind that moves us and roots that keep us steady. And you're the tree that brings it all together. When you're sitting down to write an op-ed, start by asking two simple questions. First, where do I need to stir the air? In other words, what's the urgent issue or misconception that needs to be challenged right now? Maybe it's a piece of legislation that doesn't sit right with you. It could be a local controversy. It could be a moment where silence feels complicit and you have that instinct to speak up. That's your wind. What are you stirring? Second is, where can you plant roots? So that's where you bring in your evidence, your lived experience, or a moral argument that grounds your piece. Readers trust what feels real and rooted. Then think about how to blend passion with credibility. The best op-eds pair story with substance, and they move readers emotionally and intellectually. Always keep your audience in mind as well. That's really important. So, who are you trying to reach? Who has the power to act or be persuaded? And finally, think about the news source. What kind of tone and stories does that outlet usually publish? The best advice I can give you to understanding an outlet's tone is to simply search published op-eds and LTEs by that media source and get a sense for how they write it and what they're publishing. So the goal is to find that sweet spot where your truth meets the moment, but also where your story can both move and ground the public conversation. Once you've got your idea, how do you actually write an op-ed? First is start strong. Think of your opening like a sudden gust of wind. Your thesis statement needs to catch the reader's attention right away. Use a vivid image, a surprising fact, a short personal anecdote. Ask yourself, why would someone want to keep reading past the first sentence? Next is build the case. Much like an argumentative essay, this is where your roots come in. Present your key facts, your analysis, and your evidence, and make sure that whatever evidence you use, that you're hyperlinking that within your draft. Do not use in-text citations. This is not an academic essay. You don't want to put parentheses, author, comma, year. You want to just put the, say you're sharing a form, a piece of legislation or a link to another article that has good data. You just want to hyperlink that to where you're saying it. And that's enough for the pitch for them to decide if they're going to use the op-ed. Then offer a clear call to action. You'll need to show readers what to do and how to think differently. Maybe it's signing a petition, voting a certain way, or simply re-examining an existing assumption. So tangibility is what turns your idea into impact. And finally, close memorably. End with an image or an insight that carries your message beyond the page, that scatters the seeds through wind. So bring it back to your main thesis so the reader feels that full circle moment of clarity. In short, start with wind, build your roots throughout, and end by letting your message take flight. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to use an example of an op-ed I had published in The Hill titled Limiting Environmental Review. The Justices Put Development Ahead of Communities. In this piece, I argue that the Supreme Court's May 2025 decision to limit environmental reviews under the National Environmental Policy Act dangerously prioritizes industrial development over environmental health, justice, and safety. And we're not going to debate the merits of the op-ed itself. Instead, we're going to look specifically at structure here. Let's see how all this comes together in a real life example, but also how you can use these structural pieces to create your own op-ed. When writing an op-ed, these are the key sections you should follow. Spot the hook. How does the opening sentence grab attention and set the tone? Track the winds and roots. So where does the author stir debate? And where do they ground the argument in evidence or values? Notice the structure. The usual flow of an op-ed goes introduction, you weave in key points with your prose, you have your call to action, and then you have clear transitions throughout. Every paragraph should not feel like a separate story. It should all be interwoven and connected. And voice and tone, what makes the writing persuasive yet approachable, and also does it fit the structure of the media source you're trying to pitch? And then you want to have a closing impact. So how does that final paragraph leave the reader's feeling? You want to have a sense of a call to action, whether it be something tangible or something emotionally stimulating that leaves someone wondering, what do I do next? But it has to relate back to your thesis to have that full circle moment for it to feel like a complete piece. Let's start with the hook. I'm going to read the sentence of the op-ed that I wrote on the Hill. Here's the sentence of the opening op-ed. The Supreme Court's decision in May to narrow the scope of environmental reviews under the 1969 National Environmental Policy Act is a dangerous concession to short-term development interests at the expense of long-term public and environmental health. So why does this work? First is immediate relevance. You understand right off the bat that the author is trying to convey the stakes are clear through, or trying to convey that the Supreme Court decision is unjust, according to the author. And the stakes are also clear through strong language, such as dangerous concession or expense of long-term public and environmental health. So there's that language combined with the overall immediacy of what's happening, and there's focus and clarity. And yes, there's a lot hinted within this opening sentence, and it can be taken a lot of different ways, but it all ties back to that central argument about the Supreme Court's decision. And also, roots are used within this opening to directly link the Supreme Court's decision that the Supreme Court released. We can also track the wind and roots of this piece, and here's one example of many throughout. Far from simply streamlining federal reviews, the ruling opens the door to projects with massive ecological and climate consequences, all while silencing the voices of the frontline communities that NEPA was designed to protect. I want us to break this down through four lenses: wind, roots, contrast, and moral clarity. So first is wind. Where does the sentence stir the air? What's provocative or challenging about it? Notice how it reframes the idea of streamlining into something potentially dangerous and pushes against the dominant narrative presented by the Supreme Court. So their decision was because of streamlining. So this is saying streamlining does the opposite of what the Supreme Court intended. It provides that new perspective. Next is roots. What grounds this argument? You can see it draws strength from its values for protection of communities, environmental responsibility, in the original intent of NEPA. That's what the sentence is trying to get at. That's the foundation and the credibility. And also, there in bold, silencing the voices is a hyperlinked report in the article to NEPA that backs the claims the author makes. So that's a specific data point to back what was said. Contrast, how does the author set two opposing ideas against each other here? So in this case, there's a clash between streamlining, which could sound as positive, and the reality of what streamlining can do, which is silencing voices and potentially opening up harmful projects. So that tension gives the audience wanting to read more to understand how so? How is the Supreme Court potentially wrong about this decision? And finally, moral clarity. What makes the sentence feel urgent or ethically charged? It's not just policy critique, it's a defense of justice and the right to be heard. That's what this sentence is getting at. That moral dimension is what transforms information into persuasion. So as you write your own op-eds, think about how can you weave these elements together? When to move, roots to ground, contrast to sharpen your ideas, and finally that moral clarity to inspire. Now let's pay attention to structure, because how an op-ed is built is just important as what it says. First, there needs to be a clear arc. A strong op-ed moves from the problem to a concrete solution. There needs to be a forward motion, almost like a stream. You're starting at the top and you're going down. Then there's logical layering. Your job as the writer is to guide from a broad context, why this issue matters, to specific evidence and examples, the roots. So you're taking something that can be set in space and providing a satellite image to a street level view to help the reader see both big picture ideas and the niche specific ideas. And next, look for an actionable close. This helps the piece end with direction, what the reader should do, should think, or demand. And finally, smooth transitions. Like I mentioned before, it's so important that when you're transitioning from paragraph to paragraph that you're layering and that the op-ed is not a bunch of different stories. Rather, it is one connected story with different ideas that build on the next. Also, this is just to reiterate, different outlets have different expectations and style preferences. Remember to read pieces from that source before pitching them to op-eds or before pitching op-eds and LTEs, and make sure that they take those submissions before you want to write an op-ed or an LTE for a certain media source. You want to ensure that they actually are. So you can simply Google Washington Post op-ed submissions and see if they're open, and that will give you a clearer sense before you actually write it. And here's an example of a closing statement from that op-ed from The Hill. As the pace and intensity of the climate crisis accelerates, the public needs more transparency, not less, and more accountability, not expanded loopholes. While this ruling may offer legal relief to developers, it marks a grave retreat from our commitments to environmental justice and a future built with foresight, not sacrificed to expedience. So the conclusion here widens the lens back as the writer zooms back out to address the societal strengths first contributed in the thesis. And there's a sense of persuasion. As you can see, it's written as more this, not this repetition. And that's on purpose to create contrast that creates a sense of emotional resonance to understand what that difference may look like given a different decision by the Supreme Court. So, while not shown as well throughout the paragraphs of the op-ed, the piece goes into that granular street view and comes back out at the end in this closing impact. And it concludes strongly with an emotional hook to get you thinking about, well, how does this Supreme Court decision impact future environmental projects and who's involved? So, as you think about structure of op-eds and approaches, we're going to turn it over to Joy, who's going to walk us through crafting a successful letter to the editor.
Thank you, Diego. And Diego's really selling himself short on his ability to rapidly write and publish op-eds. I know that was a technical policy example in the Hill, but like Diego said, there's a wide range of outlets out there who want to publish young people's voices and opinions more broadly on environmentalism. The possibilities really are endless. And there's no more RCC description than becoming a tree and setting your wind and roots. So thank you all for listening. I'm going to pivot us. So I want you to take everything that Diego just said and throw it out. Just kidding. Don't throw it out. Put it on the back burner because a lot of times people confuse these two. The letter to the editor is much shorter than the op-ed, but both the op-eds and letter to the editor section are the widest read pieces of newspaper and press content. They are what people read. They're what local lawmakers read because they want to know what their constituents care about. And that's why we're focusing on them. Another great thing about the letter to the editor, which you will see, is even though it's maybe 200 words that you've written, if it gets put into somewhere like the Washington Post, you can say, I've been published in the Washington Post. And it's just a little blurb that you wrote and carefully crafted to make your voice heard. So how to approach the LTE. The number one thing I'd recommend is rapid response. You typically will want to respond, submit within 24 to 48 hours of an article that you come across. The LTE is fundamentally a response to something that has been published on an outlet. Usually an article, sometimes somebody else's op-ed. But what you want to do first is reference the article. Say like, dear editor, I read yesterday's article about XYZ. And as a resident of XYZ town, I wanted to offer some insights. The best strategy is to make one clear point in your letter to the editor. Oftentimes it'll be 150 to 250 words, and you don't have much room to kind of do the three-part essay thesis structure. So just make one point and make it well. Back it up briefly. We'll talk about jargon and data and statistics. It's really an art of sprinkling in a little bit of numerical data, but not overwhelming the editor with that data. And then closing with impact, much like the op-ed. So for finding a reaction article to respond to for your letter to the editor, pick something published recently. Pick your favorite news outlet. Pick a news outlet in your hometown, or maybe that your campus is situated in. Maybe your family lives in that town. You want a personal connection. That's what the editor is looking for most of the time in local outlets. So scan over the opinion and news sections of that outlet and look for some kind of entry point. So maybe you read an article and you want to add a fact, share a personal perspective, or correct a misconception in that article. The LTE is your chance to do so and then make a larger point. Check for relevance to you, as we discussed, pick something concise, and of course, make sure they accept LTEs on their platform. That's a big one. Just double check that it's not from 2017, but from 2025. Very quickly too, I want to distinguish between a topic and an argument for the LTE. The LTE, you want specificity and you want an argument. So instead of picking a broad topic that you're interested in, maybe green spaces, the influence of green spaces on urban communities, you will want to fine tune that into the city of Concreteopolis needs to protect Roy G. Biv Park from demolition because of the community service it provides to high schoolers. So just remember that that specificity is what matters. It's not an essay, it's an LTE. I'm going to take us through quickly the kind of three parts of an LTE so that you're ready to draft your own. You want to open with a salutation to the editor, since after all, it is a letter. By the way, we will have a template that we're going to send out during the write your own portion of this, and we'll send it out after this session as well. But in the meantime, the opening of the LTE, you're going to want to grab the reader's attention and make your argument very clearly. Declare what you are responding to in the LTE and make your claim or thesis statement pretty much right up there in the opening sentences. If there's space to do so, mention like, you can even stretch your personal connection a little bit. You can say like, I grew up in this town, or, I just visited this town for a couple of weeks and noticed this. It doesn't have to be that you're, registered to vote per se in that town or in that district, but it certainly helps. Moving into the body paragraphs, and this oftentimes is one chunk, it's one paragraph. Bring in evidence, data, and statistics, but make sure there's something inherently interesting or fiery about every statistic that you bring in. You don't want to bring them in just so you have a number. You want people to kind of read it and go, huh, with being surprised, wanting to know more. And you can cite those with hyperlinks. Again, it's not an academic essay, so I don't think citations are the most important part, but you want to make sure the editor knows that like you have a source. So a hyperlink is fine. And really you want to frame the meat of your LTE as, why should everyone care about this? Especially, why should this community that's reading this news outlet care about this? So using clear and jargon-free language, you can mention, any policies that have come up that are related to the LTE argument, or what should decision makers who are reading this LTE be doing? Where are they falling short? And then finally, for the conclusion, you end with a call to action. And throw in your best rhetorical appeals. RCC loves talking about rhetoric and writing, and Rachel Carson. This is where you want to silent spring on them a little bit. What is the risk of inaction? How does this all connect back to place? And then end on a positive or empowering note, but feel free to mic drop a little bit before you get into the sincerely your name piece, which you will see in our template. So because this example LTE is in our template document, you don't have to read all of it or take notes or anything, but I'm just going to point out some very quick details here. This is from one of our RCC affiliates, our fellows, who was published in the Washington Post recently. And you will see that in her LTE, she's responding to an article about heat waves in DC over the summer, and her response, highlighted in yellow, you can see she identifies herself as someone who was living in Northwest DC at the time. She talks about how different neighborhoods experience those temperatures very differently. She's adding that perspective. And then highlighted in blue, she throws in a statistic, 5 to 10 degrees hotter than other neighborhoods, with occasional hyperlinks scattered within. And then highlighted in green, her thesis, that's why equity must be at the very heart of the city's response, followed by a pink highlight of some policies that she mentions to go along with her call to action, centering equity in heat response. So you can see how short and to the point this LTE is. It was published, a lot of times outlets will do this, where they'll publish your LTE in kind of a digest of multiple LTEs around a topic that they thought were the strongest. So this one was part of an extreme heat LTE burst for the day. So that's how you can find your published work. That was a lot of information. So we're going to take a pause and open it up for any questions people have before we move into LTE writing of our own. So thank you all so much. And you can use the raise hand feature to ask your question, and we'll also be going through the chat.
Yeah, Joy, we can start with the question in the chat. When is the best / right time to submit an op-ed or LTE? Should I focus on a breaking news event, or should I think more about the specific policy topic?
That's a great question, and I'll let you take a stab at it too, Diego. And also, if any of you have been published, by the way, already, feel free to chime in the chat because this call is full of experts and environmentalists, so we'd love to hear your perspectives. From RCC's perspective, I think it's always a good time to submit an op-ed or LTE. But if you're thinking like a news editor, they want the punchy breaking news type events. They want the content that everybody is talking about on social media. They want all of the wind, as Diego described it. Um, but if you have a really niche policy topic that you're interested in, maybe a campus project that you're doing, you can find ways to weave that into a current event. Maybe your hook is opening up with a current event. So you can still grab the editor's attention that way. Diego, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that was really well put, Joy. One thing that I do strategically to figure out what I'm going to write about within an op-ed is sometimes looking at the news, seeing what headlines are happening, figuring out the angle of a certain article or articles under the same topic, and what are all of those articles missing? Is there a certain theme that's left out? Is there a certain lens that the articles are not approaching? And from there, I use that as my starting point to realize this is the angle that brings a new perspective that will allow me to quote unquote be that tree, to have those wind and roots, to write a piece that adds to the dialogue to an already existing event. For an LTE, like Joy had mentioned, it's really, really crucial that an LTE be written as close to the original article as possible. So an op-ed is not written in response to an existing article. It's your own thoughts. But an LTE is specifically targeting something that has been written and adding a new perspective, or maybe a perspective that was not thought about, or a comment about the article. So that should be as close to the release date as possible. That's my biggest piece of advice for the LTE. But you can really focus on either. I think it's important to focus on big news events, but also providing that lane where maybe a big news event is forgetting a niche subject.
I have a question, guys. So how controversial do you recommend I be if I'm writing something? Like, what's sort of the vibe that we're going for?
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Joy, I can take a stab at this first. I think you should definitely feel free to speak your mind and share your opinion in a way that you would be in a professional setting. So think about the news source and you're writing something for a news source. You want it to represent you and your thoughts in a way that can allow people to either relate, agree, disagree with, and have some sort of understanding of what you're trying to convey. So I would recommend trying to ensure that you remain professional within your writing.
I second that. Nothing to add on my end. But I did see a question in the chat from Ben that I think is the perfect Diego question as a published sci-fi novelist and op-ed writer. Could you walk through the process of pitching op-eds and LTEs? Do you usually write and complete the piece before or after pitching?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. For both op-eds and LTEs, first thing I do is I go to the media site that I want to release it at and ensure that they have a space to publish op-eds and LTEs. Sometimes certain news sources don't, sometimes they do. Once I have that down, given my audience, given the tone I want to write the piece in, I then, for let's say an op-ed, have an idea of what I want to share. So I write the entirety of the op-ed because they can't decide if they're going to use it unless if it's not written. So usually there'll be a form, and the form will have your name, your title of the op-ed, which you want it to feel catchy, and the subject of the op-ed itself. So is it climate? Is it world news? All that good stuff. You pick your subject, you paste your op-ed in the document or the form, whatever it is, with all the hyperlinks in it. And then it will usually ask you what are your professional background slash experiences with this event and why do you have merit to write it? And then from there, you can share all the related information to your career, to your major on how you can back your claims. And then you just hit submit. For an LTE, you just read through articles and decide, okay, I want to write a 200-word response to this article because it's missing this perspective. And then you write it as well, follow the form and submit it.
Most of the time it's a form response, so it varies by outlet, but in the cases where there's no distinct form for whatever reason, you can kind of do a cover letter approach where you find the generic email like editor@xyzpost.com and email that. And if you can find the actual editor by name and CC them, even better. No worries if you can't. And then you can just say kind of a cover letter line like, "Dear editor, I've written a letter in response to the October 7th mention of this article." And that's really all you need to say. And then attach your letter there. So the cover letter strategy is just concise. See if you can pinpoint the actual editor. No big deal if you can't.
Also, make sure to follow word counts. That is so key. And at the end, after the Q&A, we're going to do a little writing session and talk about some key tips for how to submit as well. Oh, Sneha, great question. So here's the question. I'm sort of confused on how to / where to write to about something that may not be very breaking news at the moment or on policy agendas just yet, but may be something that needs attention in the long run. For instance, I'm a PhD student working on conserving dung beetles in West Virginia. Where do I focus on writing about my research to?
That is a great question, and it's something we could definitely workshop during and after this call if we don't get to it. Um, if you feel like your topic or argument is not on the policy agenda yet, there are ways that you can put it on the policy agenda and link it to something that's already there. For example, first of all, this is a super cool topic, dung beetles in West Virginia, conservation. Maybe your angle is you find an article about charismatic species and the conservation of charismatic species. Jane Goodall just passed away, legend, may she rest in peace. Maybe your in is like, the chimpanzees and the charismatic megafauna deserve our full conservation attention. But do you know what else deserves our conservation attention? Dung beetles. Let me tell you about this awesome program or policy or initiative and lean in that way. I think you can find the links to current events. It just takes a lot of workshopping and creativity to do so.
Yeah, no further comments from me, Joy. That makes a ton of sense and well put. Reagan has a question here. If you have an op-ed you have written and there is more than one publication you could potentially submit to, is it seen as professional to submit it to multiple papers at once? So Reagan, usually you will submit to one at a time and it will say in the submission form, are you submitting to other publications? And usually they don't like that. So I would submit to one at a time. That's what I always do. And they usually accept or reject your op-ed within a span of max 5 days. So you'll know pretty quickly. So you can get it around very quick while it's still relevant.
Yeah, nothing really to add on my end to the pitching and publication piece. We're happy to follow up to specific pitching questions. I know we didn't focus on as much, but after the interactive breakout, we'll have a little bit on submissions, exceptions, rejections, pitching, and all of that. I have a quick question, Diego. I'm going to fire at you. What if I really like the article that I read and I have nothing to add to, correct, fix, comment on, criticize about for an LTE? What approach should I take then?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would think about once again, what is missing? What's the angle that perhaps is being left out? And it could be something you agree with, but you're like, oh, this was awesome, but I wish they would have dived more deeper into this subject or this subject. So I would really focus on just expanding a certain element that you resonated with that could be more detailed throughout the piece that isn't talked about in a detailed way.
I think a common plight that some people fall into is a personal attack of whoever wrote the original article. So that's something I would recommend avoiding, even if you read some like far-fetched article about, I don't know, like climate, chemtrails, conspiracies, everything, and you just don't personally agree with it. I would not spend the LTE attacking the author, their credibility, their grammar. I've seen people try to correct grammar in LTEs. Don't go into all of that. Just focus purely on the merits of your argument and the timeliness of your argument, and that's typically what will get published. We'll look out for any final questions before we switch gears. But I did receive a question that I will pitch now. Is RCC staff willing to review or edit any LTEs or op-eds that I write?
Absolutely. Please email us. Please work with us. We're more than happy to connect and, you know, brainstorm on ideas and be editors and look over things for you. So yes, absolutely. Joy, you're on mute.
Thank you, Diego. Thanks for your great questions, guys. Keep the questions coming throughout the session. We're going to switch gears now into the interactive portion. And I know this is people's favorite time to leave the call, but I would highly recommend staying because I personally find it difficult to sit down and do advocacy writing unless I block out time for it. So here is the blocked out 15-ish minutes just to get your idea down. So take a couple minutes, scan some of the media that you read through, maybe your favorite outlets, and try to find an article or two that would be compelling for your next LTE. And if you get far enough to outline it, great, but we're not going to do share outs or anything because 15 minutes is not long enough to fully write out an LTE. We'll send the template as well. And feel free to come off mute if you have questions, but we'll just take the next 10 or 15 minutes to get started.
And at the end, after we do practice time, we're going to come back and talk more about submission guidelines, but also talk about some great opportunities for you post this webinar that you may be interested in. And Mindy, oh my gosh, so good to see your question come in. I hope you're well. Can you respond to another opinion piece? Yes, you absolutely can. You can rebut points and make an original piece, providing your own evidence and expressing your own opinion on the topic. So yeah. And I'll go ahead and paste the RCC LTE template and example document right now in the chat. All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and start moving along here. I really wish we could go through everyone's proposed ideas for their LTEs and talk about it. And if that is something you do want to do to have more advice from Joy or I, definitely feel free to continue this conversation post-webinar, send us an email. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move on. So now that you have a plethora of information and tactics for writing both op-eds and LTEs, we're going to talk about some additional tips for submitting them that we have mentioned through questions that we're going to reiterate here. So for both op-eds and LTEs, you must follow the guidelines by the outlet. That includes word limit. Never go over the word limit. Formatting, if there's a specific font they want. And how to submit, you put in your email, you fill out the web form. It's usually extremely clear. And if you ever have questions, say you come across something where you're not sure what to put as your title, are you a fellow? Are you a student? Are you an employee of a company? If you're not sure how to navigate that, let us know. We're happy to help you. Be timely. Remember, that's key. Include your full contact information in your sign out. So that includes your name, your phone, your email. It's also important when you submit, while you're also sharing why it's important that your op-ed is being written, also include a 1 to 2 sentence bio. Keep it short and snappy, but include that in there and use a clear subject line for your email. So for op-ed specifically, the range is usually between 600 to 800 words. Really focus on bringing in a unique perspective. It's okay if your op-ed is on a topic that is shared about a lot or commonly used in public news sources, but what's your unique angle on it? That's the key. Then you want to pitch with that short cover email. So, dear, whatever the contact is, my name is Diego Tovar. I'm the Director of Campus and Civic Engagement at the Rachel Carson Council. I'm writing an op-ed on blank because I think it's important related to XYZ in your community or in the community that this new news outlet is located in. And then you paste the op-ed if it's an email. or they'll tell you what to do, and then you hit send. And so target publications where your audience and decision makers will read it.
And just to reiterate, for LTEs, keep it short, whatever they ask for, and send it within the couple of days range of the original article's publication. So getting published, woo! If you get published, great job. You have a byline now, and we encourage you to leverage it. So post on LinkedIn, social media. If you feel compelled to tag RCC, we would absolutely love that. And include it in your resume, personal website. Check on exclusivity rules with the news source through your contact if you want to share it on a website. And yeah, let it be a writing sample. And then keep publishing because that's just your first one is like your kickoff publication. And from there it gets easier and easier. Um, if you don't get published, that's okay. That's usually what happens. And the key is to just keep trying. And you can ask us, let's say you do get published and or you're really confident about what you've written. If you want to incorporate RCC into your byline somehow for to, you know, have a legitimacy behind your pitch, definitely talk to us about that. If you're like an RCC NELF fellow, for example, or RCC Campus Network affiliate, anything of that nature, we can definitely talk about how you want to frame yourself because I think, you know, young people, we have imposter syndrome. We want to be taken seriously. And I know there are a lot of young folks on this call who are trying to get published. And so we want to help with that. Um, and yeah, just don't be dissuaded if it's not a one and done situation where you get published right away. It's a process. And with that, we've wrapped up the main content of this workshop and want to thank you all again so much for coming. We're going to spam you with links and resources now. That's what we're going to do. Starting here with our mailing list QR code where you can kind of stay on top of RCC's events, writing, things that we're up to in DC. And Diego and I both put our emails on this slide as well if you want to reach out personally. We're also going to drop in the chat a link to our Eventbrite page, which we encourage you to follow and sign up for our upcoming workshops. We're going to have one on October 22nd about local government advocacy, getting involved at the local level. And I'm going to be leading that one, and I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be a good bookend to this particular workshop. And then we will also have, if you feel compelled to donate financially rather than your time in supporting RCC, we have a link for that as well that's housed within our website. And Diego, excitingly, is going to wrap us up with some words about the NELF Fellowship and our offerings for students.
Yeah, thanks, Joy. So I wanted to end this on a really, really great opportunity for anyone who's going to be at a college or university during the 2026-2027 academic year. Every year, we have the National Environment Leadership Fellowship, where students organize and create a project on their campus or within their community related to an environmental justice related theme. And we build skills and advocacy, storytelling, policy. Your work is nationally published. You get to meet a cohort of young environmental leaders who are going to create such great change. So I wanted to just put that out there. I'm going to send you a flyer. You're free to apply today. It's on that QR code that will be shared in our email in a moment, and it's also on our website. But I'm not going to talk about it too much right now because I want us to focus on the op-ed and LTE. But I'm happy to continue the conversation for anyone who is interested down the line about the fellowship program. And with that being said, thank you so much for your time, for your support. And I hope you gained all the skills you need out of this to use your voice to create powerful change within your communities across the nation and globally. So thank you all. Have a great night.